You might have heard before that you need to spend 10,000 hours until you become a good artist or animator. One of the reasons is because you have to build up your so-called visual library. If you have one, your work will improve a lot. But what exactly is a visual library and how do you build one? This is a question actually that was asked under the Q&A videos. I always invite you guys to ask more questions. I'm really thankful that this person brought up the topic of a visual library because when I read the question, that was the first time I ever heard this term. So I had to do some research and I found out that this is an insanely important tool that every artist is doing already anyway, but if you have a name for it, if you know what it is and what it is for, you can build your visual library so much more effectively. And what it is actually quite simple. It's a library in your head of everything that you've ever seen. And seen might not be the right term because it's not just seeing, it's analyzing and understanding something and saving that information in your brain. The problem is that our brain glances over a lot of details. Like we don't see and we don't remember everything correctly. And that leads to a variety of interesting mistakes that especially beginners make. A very good example to see the visual library at work is if you ask anyone to draw a bicycle from memory. And a lot of people will end up with something that is definitely not a bicycle because you don't know how all these metal bars connect and why they connect where, and so oftentimes drawing a bicycle ends up terribly. But not if you have studied a bicycle before and saved its function and its structure in your visual library.
Super special challenge! Can you draw a bike without looking it up? Grab pen and paper, try it now!
And if you want, share your result for everyone to enjoy in the comments. Thank you! Another example is if you ask somebody to draw a castle. And many people will draw a castle how they used to as a kid. You know, the classical structure with the 4 towers and the square walls, and then there is a little drawbridge, and like that's a very naive picture of a castle. Castles don't really look that way. If you pull up a photo, for example, you will notice that many castles, like they're towers of different height popping up at different places, and it doesn't follow the nice structure that we put into our brain as a kid. And isn't this interesting? Although we have seen castles countless times before, we still might draw the naive version of a castle. This just now were 2 examples for a direct influence of the visual library in your head, but there are also many occasions where the visual library is at work, but it's not, it's not to draw the exact same object. It's not to draw a bicycle. It's not to draw a castle, but it's more about the principles that you picked up from nature and architecture. For example, if you were to draw an alien planet or a monster, it looks a lot better if your alien planet looks a little bit like something we have seen in real life. Maybe you have seen a foggy mountainscape at one point when you were hiking in the mountains, and you can turn this into an alien planet. Or for your monster, you model it after an elephant or another animal that you have seen, and you're using the same basic proportions, but you make it bigger and more frightening or something like that. It can also be at play just when you put text on a poster, because our eye has certain things that it perceives as pleasant and well balanced with good proportions, and principles like straight against curve and stuff like this actually come from nature. And if you have seen how nature builds things, builds muscles, you can actually put that in your designs. I mean, look at cars. Good car designs become more and more organic. They have a certain flow in it, and that looks good because this flow comes out of nature. So it's not only important to build your visual library to draw that exact thing, but to learn the principles of what looks good, what looks cool, what looks real. And this is actually the answer to another very important question we got on here about if and why is it important to learn figure drawing as an animator. And I would say because of this reason, it's very important, especially if you're a 2D animator, because you even if you do very, very cartoony things, you learn the principles of balance, you learn the principles of flow from nature, and then you can apply it in your more reduced work. And I have to say, I have to admit, I didn't study enough anatomy, and I feel that all the time, that you cannot draw the reduced version of something if you don't know how the real version looks, obviously. So I have to work with a lot of reference in instances where other people just pull it out of their minds. And that's, by the way, a very great way how you can catch up if you didn't build up your visual library as a student or as a kid. It's really helpful to, I have to draw a castle, but wait, I've never really analyzed how castles look. So it would be, we have the internet nowadays, so you can just go online, pull up a castle and try to, get your visual library up to date. Of course, that's a disadvantage compared to somebody who already knows how a castle looks and why, and who visited castles. But we will get to that in a second. Another really important thing that I want to mention, what I found very interesting, is that the visual library is not the only library that you're building. For animators, there must be something like a motion library or a posing library that you have to build up at the same time. And maybe that's another good reason to do why you should do figure drawing, because these real people cannot bend their joints in ways that a real person cannot bend. Something that a 3D animator might make as a mistake, if that is, if they, for example, take the hand and rotate it in that direction, which is not possible. We can bend our hand that way, back and there, but we cannot go in this direction, at least not much. So that is knowledge that you need to get into your head somehow. I think we talked about another case of this real motion range when I was talking about when you place your hand on the table and the elbow begins to hover, that it's not your elbow that's being pulled up, it's your shoulder that's being pulled up. And that's why you need to observe reference to notice, okay, this motion is not coming from the elbow, this motion is coming from the shoulder. This is the part of anatomy that is really, really important for animators. I mean, maybe they can space out on the live drawing part, but they need to get a feeling for how things move and how far and in what direction they can move. Another important library, at least for me, is a storytelling library. Like every book you've ever read, every movie, might go partially into your visual library. Like even books are great. If you imagine things after a written description, that's amazing. That's something that only you can see in your head. That's a very, very valuable kind of imagery. But another great thing is that you get a feeling for what stories work, what plots work, how story structure work, and you get that for free while you read something, while you are entertained, while you're doing something that you already love. Reading books is something that I can definitely recommend for building a visual library and a storytelling library. Another thing that might be very interesting is how our childhood and our youth actually shapes us in that direction. As I said, I haven't heard the term visual library before, so I wasn't actively building one, and I was just kind of collecting whatever was around me. And now that I look at how my work looks and what I did as a teenager, is like heavily connected. I read all the Franco-Belgian comics and the Disney comics, and they really shaped how I construct my stories and my comedy and my cartoon designs. And that's why I'm good at this specific drawing style, because I sucked it up as a kid, which I think we probably should support our kids more, because I feel like a lot of art class, at least in Germany, sometimes it's just like, oh, we need to keep the kids busy, they can just do something. No, we should make them build their visual library. We should make them look closer at things and learn how things really function, how they look. I think we don't do that often enough. But now that you are aware that this needs to happen, if you're still a student, now you know why you have to set the time aside to practice. Now you know why it's important to draw a teacup, because then you can model all teacups and maybe even fantasy teacups from that one teacup that you studied that one time. And there might be details that that go beyond the naive imagination that we have as a child. So yeah, the earlier you start with building a visual library, and the earlier you start being conscious about it, the better. But as I said, you can still catch up if you have to, with reference and with drawings practice that you schedule. There are great books and websites actually that prompt you a drawing exercise, a drawing task every day. That is a wonderful way to catch up. And yeah, what are the rules of building a visual library? It's just learning to really observe, to not just see, but to see details and reasons and functions and patterns, and forcing your brain to save what it would otherwise gloss over, because it's might not be important. Like if a normal person sees a bicycle, all they need to know, okay, it's a bike. But like you need to know, this bar is connected in this way and this is holding this up, and if this, I understand, if this bar would be missing, the whole construction would collapse. Like there's reasons behind everything. Like you can help your brain to remember it by actually getting behind the function, by actually understanding it. And you can do that by looking at photos. But something that I think is even more important is to see things in person. And it's not only true for real things that you could see, like if you have to draw a train or an airplane, it's great to see the real thing. It's great to feel how big these things are, to feel their presence, how it's really, how it really feels. I think that is a very important aspect of art. We don't just show how things look. We have to show how things feel. Like, of course, you can draw the Grand Canyon from a photo, but if you've been there, if you've seen how big it is, you can put something additionally in it. You can put in what you felt while you saw it. And that's why traveling is important. That's why going to the museum is important. Like you might have seen all the great masters' work in prints, but if you stand in front of a painting like a Monet, you realize that there is an aura coming out of this picture that prints don't really capture. There's one thing that really impressively taught me how being somewhere is so much different than seeing something in a picture or in a movie. I live in Germany, and my now wife is American, so at one point, of course, I went to America with her and saw how the United States look. And the interesting thing about this is that in Europe, we grow up with American television and feature films. Like 80% of what we see in television or in the cinemas, in the movie theaters, is American. So we know how America looks like. We we see it often. But when I was there, I was really experiencing it. I was overwhelmed by the scale of nature there. Like in Germany, it's very hard to find a place where you don't see any sign of civilization. In America, you just need to drive a little out of town, a little out of city, and then you stand in an ocean of trees. You don't see any sign of humans anymore pretty quickly. And that was an experience that was so completely different from what I have experienced in Europe, or the small part of Europe that I've seen so far. And another thing is also just how rooms feel. Like, one thing is the air conditioning. We rarely have air conditioning in Germany because we don't need it most of the time. But it gives the room a certain feel, and just the way how light switches look different from ours. I guess if you see it in television, you just look at it with your own visual library. You're just like, oh, this is a room. I recognize it as a room. It's just like an European room. But if you are there in person, you notice all these little differences. And of course, only if you have experienced these things in person, you can really draw what it actually feels like to be there. So if possible, try to see the real thing, and then notice the essence, notice the aura, notice all the little details and all the little functions and reasons why things are the way they are. And when you're frustrated with practicing, remember that the 10,000 hour rule is not just something to magically get a better hand coordination or something like that. It's active memory work. And the fun thing is, you can control your own specialization. You can control the content of the library by your interests. You can pick out what really fascinates you to build this library. It can be a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be a chore. And let's talk for a moment about how to analyze animation. And once again, I think you should go with what fascinates you. If you are an animator or animation student, you probably watch enough animation to have moments where you're like, whoa, what was that? That was really interesting. And, normal people just glance over it and have a great experience. Your task is to stop and be like, wait a second. Why did that look the way it looked? What made it so amazing? And then maybe pull it up on the computer and look through it frame by frame, follow the arcs if there was something interesting about the way something moved. If it was an acting decision, you can save that in your head. For example, I one of my favorite scenes in Basil the Great Mouse Detective is this wonderful scene where Basil insults Ratigan. Ratigan, instead of being furious, just closes his pocket watch, doesn't react, and then goes on about something else. Like, that's a really, really brilliant moment. And I saved this into my motion animation library, whatever you called it, that sometimes the non-reaction can be extremely funny. So just watch animation with an open eye. And if you saw something that was notable, save it in an extra folder. Give it a name. Try to pinpoint down what makes this animation special. And that can be anything. Just watch what you enjoy. There's enough out there. And maybe one more thing that's really interesting in my case, I don't know if that helps any one of you out there, but I feel like I don't have a memory that is as visual as many other artists seem to have it. Like, I always hear from other artists like, oh, I see this in front of my eyes. And I'm like, I don't work that visual. I cannot pull up images. I feel like most of the time I just pull up information. I feel like I pull up words. Like for the castle, for example, I have this mental note of attention. Towers of a castle are not just 4 in a row. They are stuck in a very interesting way, and you should always look that up and stuff like that. I feel like I almost have this information in text form in my head. and not in images. And so far, that has worked for me pretty well. So if you were not someone who's like, oh, I can see it all in front of me, it's probably some people have that, other people don't. You need to find the way that works for you, and that's completely okay. I want to end this video with some thoughts about the perspective that we artists have onto the world, and how I think it's something special. It sounds so cheesy, but I feel like if we make something our job and our passion, that enables us to see the world through more awake eyes than the average people see stuff. Like, we want to notice details. We want to notice, why did that person just move that way? Why? Oh, that's very interesting. What happened in the face there? What is the theory behind that? We want to figure out stuff. We want to figure out, like, wait, why exactly is a bicycle built this way? Wait, why are muscles built that way? What are the rules? What are the patterns for flow in nature? Like, we concern ourselves with things that the normal person are surrounded with, but not necessarily think about. And personally, I think that is pretty amazing, that we as artists have the privilege to see so much of the world, and then through our art tell the people about how the world works. I think that's a very fascinating perspective that we have, and we should consciously enjoy it and build on that. So given that this is my first time ever exploring the concept of visual libraries, I'm of course very, very interested in what you guys have to say about this, or what you maybe heard in your art school, how visual libraries work and what good strategies are to build them up and to fill them up. So yeah, if you have any thoughts, any ideas, just let us all know in the comments. I think it's a very, very important tool that we will all benefit from. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this, I would be very happy if you subscribe or recommend my videos to your friends. And I can't wait to talk to you next time. Keep the questions coming.